I've often wondered what people really mean when they talk about gut instincts. You hear about it constantly. Someone says they just knew something was wrong, that a situation didn't feel right, but they ignored that inner voice. Looking back, I now know my own gut had been screaming at me for months before my wedding day. It warned me that my fiancée Clara and my best friend Miles were getting too close. Uncomfortably close. But I was too distracted to listen. I was consumed by my demanding job at a tech consultancy, buried under deadlines and endless client calls. I was also caught up in planning the elaborate wedding Clara dreamed of. A spectacle designed less for us and more for her family, the Harringtons. Her parents, Charles and Vivian, were influential figures in Ridgewood, a small but affluent city. They had money, connections, and a deep obsession with appearances. Even when a flicker of jealousy sparked, when I caught Clara and Miles laughing quietly in a corner, or noticed how his gaze lingered a beat too long on her, I brushed it aside. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, Miles and I had been best friends since college. We'd shared a shoebox-sized dorm, pulled caffeine-fueled all-nighters, and covered for each other when things went sideways. We were closer than brothers, or so I believed. But the warning signs were everywhere. Clara and Miles texted constantly, far more often than a best friend and a fiancé ever should. I'd see them smirking at messages, or whispering jokes they refused to explain. If I asked what was so funny, they'd deflect with a breezy, "Just a meme," or "inside joke. You wouldn't get it." I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Miles was my best man. Clara was the woman I was about to marry. Why would either of them betray me? The wedding preparations only added to the stress. Clara's family insisted on a 300-guest extravaganza at an estate just outside Ridgewood. "We'll split the costs," her parents said, but they pushed for a string quartet, imported flowers, and a menu curated by a celebrity chef. My parents, retired public school teachers, had to dip into their savings to cover their share. Whenever I tried to set financial boundaries, Vivian scoffed, "We can't cut corners. We're the Harringtons. What would people say if the bride looked cheap on her wedding day?" Clara usually sided with her mother. "Let them enjoy themselves," she'd say with a shrug. "We'll only do this once." Famous last words. A week before the ceremony, Miles offered to manage the hotel bookings for our out-of-town guests. "You've got enough to worry about," he told me with his usual easy smile. "Let me handle this." It felt good to trust him with something important, like old times. The night before the wedding, our families gathered at the rehearsal dinner. Clara, in an elegant cream dress, flitted among her relatives. My parents stood awkwardly by the bar, clearly uncomfortable with the wealth on display. After the formalities, we moved to a lounge for an after-party. Spirits were high, until I noticed Clara was missing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. One of her bridesmaids casually mentioned she'd stepped out for air. I shrugged it off. Pre-wedding nerves, I assumed. But when Miles also vanished not long after, unease stirred in my chest. Half an hour passed, then an hour. Something felt wrong. Scrolling through social media, I stumbled across a short Instagram story Clara had posted, and deleted almost instantly. But I'd seen enough. It showed a hotel hallway with distinctive gold carpet patterns and a partial room number. It wasn't from our venue. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My gut screamed, "Go see for yourself." I drove through Ridgewood's hotel district, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Maybe she was visiting a friend. Maybe Miles was helping her pick something up. But a darker voice kept whispering the truth I didn't want to face. I parked outside one of the boutique hotels and stepped inside. The receptionist didn't recognize me, but I noticed Miles's car in the lot. My heart hammered as I rode the elevator to the 8th floor. I scanned the door numbers, 845, 846, 847. My palms were slick with sweat. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. Tentatively, I tried the handle. It wasn't dead-bolted. Then I remembered. Miles had given me a master keycard weeks earlier, just in case of any guest room issues. I slid it into the slot. A green light blinked. The door opened. The room was dim, lit only by a bedside lamp. Soft murmurs drifted through the air. I stepped inside soundlessly and froze. There on the bed were Clara and Miles, tangled together, bare skin, disheveled hair, whispered laughter. I felt my stomach drop as rage surged like wildfire through my veins. My fists curled instinctively. I wanted to scream, to drag him off her and beat him senseless. But a colder, calmer voice whispered, "Don't. Not yet." I pulled out my phone, switched to video mode, and started recording. I captured Clara's flushed face, Miles's voice saying, "We'll never get caught," and the timestamp in the corner of the screen. Proof. Irrefutable proof. I slipped out without a sound, the weight of the evidence burning in my pocket. I drove aimlessly for an hour before finding a 24-hour diner. In a corner booth, I replayed the video. My worst fears confirmed. But instead of breaking down, I began to plan. If they wanted humiliation, I would give it back, tenfold. Our wedding venue was equipped with state-of-the-art AV systems for slideshows and videos. I'd planned to show a montage of childhood photos and relationship milestones. That could change. By dawn, I had a plan. I would control the microphone, the projector, and the narrative. At 6:30 a.m., I returned to the apartment Clara and I shared. Unsurprisingly, she wasn't home. When she finally arrived around 9, I pretended to be asleep. She tiptoed in and went straight to the guest room, no doubt to fix her appearance. Half an hour later, I emerged, yawning. "Morning," she said with a casual smile. "I stayed with a friend. Too much wine last night." "Must have been quite a night," I replied evenly. Inside, I was seething, but my face remained neutral. She looked relieved, maybe even convinced I was clueless. Good. I needed her to believe that for a few more hours. The wedding was set for noon at Silverwood Estate, the Harringtons' chosen venue. My parents arrived early, excited and unsuspecting. Clara was getting ready with her bridesmaids. Miles was somewhere nearby. I didn't care where. I slipped into the AV booth and handed the technician a flash drive. "I've got a surprise video," I said. He grinned, unaware of what was coming. "Just cue me when to play it." By 11:50 a.m., the ballroom was nearly full. Guests from Clara's side, politicians, donors, high society friends, filled the rows. My side, smaller and humbler, was sprinkled among them. At 11:55, I was supposed to be at the altar. Instead, I watched from a balcony. When the clock hit 12:01 and the ceremony hadn't started, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Perfect. I stepped up to the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone." My voice boomed through the speakers. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. "Before we begin, there's been a slight change of plans. Actually, there won't be a ceremony." Gasps erupted. Confusion spread like wildfire. Vivian clutched her pearls. Charles muttered under his breath. Somewhere, Clara must have been panicking. "Before anyone gets too upset," I continued, "I have a short video to show you. Tony, roll it." The screen flickered. The slideshow vanished. And then the video played, the one from less than 12 hours earlier. Clara and Miles, tangled in bed. Their voices audible, the timestamp in the corner. Miles saying, "We'll never get caught." The room erupted. Screams, gasps, disbelief. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Charles nearly fell over. Vivian looked like she might faint. I let the footage loop for 10 long seconds before cutting it. The room was chaos, and it was just beginning. The ballroom dissolved into chaos the moment the screen went black. Guests gasped, shouted, and scrambled for answers. Someone cried out for the projector to be shut off. Another person fainted in the second row. And in the midst of it all, Clara appeared at the entrance in her wedding gown, eyes wide and horrified. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled into an elegant updo. but nothing could conceal the sheer panic etched into her face. "Turn it off!" she screamed, voice cracking with desperation. She might have missed the actual footage by seconds, but the shell-shocked expressions of the crowd told her everything she needed to know. Vivian stormed toward the projector, jabbing her finger at the AV staff. "Who allowed this?" she shouted, her voice shrill with rage. Charles barreled down the aisle like an enraged bull, demanding to know where I was. "Ethan! Where's Ethan?" he roared, spinning in circles. My parents sat frozen, my mother crying softly, my father standing protectively beside her. I stepped forward onto the second-floor balcony, revealing myself at last. Gasps rippled through the room as every pair of eyes locked on me. Clara's gaze followed, trembling. "What are you doing?" she shouted, her voice breaking. "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding, you coward!" Even now, amid the disaster, she clung to superstition. It almost made me laugh. "There is no wedding," I announced, my voice echoing across the hall. "You made sure of that last night." Clara froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Ethan, please," she begged. "Let's talk about this. Not here. Not like this." "Why not?" I shot back. "You had no problem cheating on me with my best friend. I think everyone who flew here and spent money to celebrate deserves to know why the ceremony's cancelled." Vivian, flushed and furious, jabbed a finger toward me. "You've humiliated the Harrington name in front of all these people. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the noise. "Humiliating? Clara and Miles humiliated me. I'm just returning the favor." The room fell silent for a heartbeat, and then a new commotion erupted near the front. Miles appeared, still in his half-finished tuxedo, hair disheveled, eyes wild with panic. "Ethan, let's talk about this," he pleaded, moving toward me. I stormed down the stairs to meet him on the main floor. Clara stepped in front of me, trying to block my path, but I shoved past her. Miles raised his hands. "You're taking this out of context," he stammered. "She was upset. It just happened." The images of them in bed replayed in my mind. My vision went red. Before I even realized what I was doing, my hand shot out and cracked across his face. The slap echoed through the stunned silence as Miles stumbled backward and fell to the floor with a groan. Clara shrieked, "Stop it! You're hurting him!" She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the gown now bunched awkwardly around her. Vivian screamed, "You monster! You assaulted him in front of everyone!" "He's the monster," I hissed, pointing at Miles as he struggled to get up. "Him and your daughter. They set me up to be a fool. Now the world knows exactly who they are." A heavy silence fell over the room. Clara looked up at me with red, tear-streaked eyes. "Ethan, I'm sorry. Please, just stop." I turned to the crowd, many of whom were holding up their phones, recording the entire spectacle. "Thank you all for coming," I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But there will be no wedding today. I'm sorry if you expected a beautiful ceremony. Instead, you get the truth." With that, I shoved open the ballroom's heavy double doors and walked out, my parents following close behind. Clara screamed my name, but I didn't look back. At the apartment, the adrenaline still pumped through my veins. My mother wept silently in the passenger seat of my car, while my father stared out the window, lost in thought. "Ethan," my mother whispered, once we were inside. "Are you sure? Was it really them?" Wordlessly, I showed her the original video, time-stamped, undeniable. She gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." My father placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do, son," he said quietly. "We lost a lot of money today, but better that than watching you live a lie." I hugged them both, thanking them for their support. They left after promising they'd always stand by me. Alone again, I began the process of erasing Clara from my life. I packed her clothes, shoes, makeup, and every piece of decor she'd insisted on buying. Then, I rented a small moving van and drove everything to the Harringtons' mansion just after midnight. The security guard recognized me. "Everything all right, Mr. Hale?" "Just dropping off Clara's belongings," I said flatly. He opened the gate. I stacked the boxes neatly on their doorstep, rang the brass knocker once, and walked away without a word. As I drove off, I saw a light flick on inside. Either Charles or Vivian was coming to see who had disturbed them at this ungodly hour. I didn't care. Clara could move back into her childhood bedroom for all I cared. I woke the next morning to furious pounding on my door. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, until Charles's booming voice shook me fully awake. "Open up! We know you're in there!" I opened the door to find Clara, Charles, and Vivian standing in the hallway. Clara's eyes were swollen from crying, her hair a mess. Charles looked ready to explode. Vivian clutched a thick stack of papers. "We need to talk about compensation," Charles said coldly. I blinked. "Compensation? For what?" Vivian shoved the papers into my hands. "The wedding fiasco. We spent tens of thousands of dollars. Lodging, catering, reservations, all of it ruined by your little display." I scanned the itemized list and nearly laughed. "You do realize your daughter cheated on me with Miles the night before our wedding, right? I'm fairly certain that's why things fell apart." Clara's face twisted with anger. "You had no right to ambush me in front of everyone. You could have just called it off quietly." "I had every right," I snapped. "You humiliated me. I returned the favor. Actions have consequences." Charles's voice rose. "We paid for half that wedding. Your parents paid for the other half, but the total cost was far more. We want our money back. $15,000. That's only a fraction of our total losses." I stared in disbelief. "You think I owe you 15 grand for a wedding your daughter sabotaged?" Vivian sneered. "You humiliated us in front of influential people, clients, donors, officials. We can't let you walk away without compensating us." I barked a bitter laugh. "Maybe none of this would have happened if Clara had kept her legs closed the night before the wedding." Clara flinched. "You jerk. Maybe if you'd been around more. If you'd cared about my needs." I cut her off with a cold laugh. "Oh, so this is my fault now? Get out. All of you. I'm not giving you a single cent." Charles stepped closer, towering over me. "Do you know who you're dealing with? I have influence in this city." "So you've said," I replied, crossing my arms. "But don't forget, I have that video. Clara's face, the timestamp. If you want to play power games, we can let the public see the raw footage. I'm sure your donors will love that." Charles faltered. He knew he had no leverage. Clara tried one last time, her voice trembling. "Ethan, please. We loved each other once." "Don't destroy everything over one mistake." "One mistake?" I echoed, my voice shaking with fury. "It wasn't a mistake. You chose to do it. I saw it. I recorded it. There's no going back. Now get out." Charles's shoulders sagged. Vivian let out a cold sniff. "You'll regret this." "Not as much as I'd regret marrying your daughter," I said, slamming the door behind them. After the Harringtons left, I stood with my forehead pressed against the door, listening to the fading echo of their footsteps down the hallway. The apartment felt cavernous and unfamiliar, like a stage set after the audience has gone home. I wandered to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared at the ring box on the counter. It looked absurd there. A tiny monument to a future that had evaporated in the space of 24 hours. Word travelled at jet speed. My phone pulsed with messages until the battery gave out. College friends, co-workers, cousins, even people I barely knew from Ridgewood who were at Silverwood Estate and wanted my side. I ended up sending the same clipped explanation over and over. I found proof, I confronted them, there would be no wedding, and then I put the phone on airplane mode. The silence after that felt like stepping out of a hurricane. My parents called from their house to say they were home safe. My mother's voice trembled as she said she wished she could have shielded me from it all. My father repeated what he'd told me earlier. Better a day of pain than a lifetime of pretending. I promised them I would make things right financially. I didn't yet know how, but the vow settled into me like a steel rod. If there was anything left that I could control, it would be taking care of them. That evening, I finished purging the apartment. The framed photos came down first. Vacations, holidays, fake candid shots of me and Clara holding paper cups at a winter market. I wrapped the pictures in newspaper, labeled the boxes, and slid them towards the door. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, bagged the leftover wedding stationery, and tossed the monogrammed napkins into the trash. The monogram, C+E, stared up at me from the bin, a union reduced to typography. For the first time in months, I slept. It wasn't peaceful. My dreams flickered with projector light, with Miles's startled face, with a white dress that kept snagging on the edge of a screen. But morning came. It always does. The days that followed were a study in contrasts, public spectacle and private reconstruction. In public, the Harringtons tried damage control. I didn't have to guess. People forwarded me the talking points. According to them, I'd suffered a stress-induced episode. I was jealous by nature. Unstable. They didn't outright deny the video. How could they? But they said it was misunderstood, taken out of context, filmed without consent. That last part stung. I wasn't proud of sharing intimate evidence in front of a crowd, but pride had been burned away by what I'd seen. I wasn't looking for moral high ground. I was looking to make sure the truth didn't get buried. In private, I went back to work. My team at the consultancy surprised me. They didn't hover or prod. Priya, my project lead, simply reassigned my client meetings for a week and told me to take time or come in, whichever steadied me. I chose to come in. The routine saved me. I solved bugs, reviewed pull requests, drafted timelines. Every task I completed was a small stake hammered into solid ground. Miles texted once, "Dude, I'm sorry. You gotta understand." I stared at the words for a full minute, baffled at the audacity of "you gotta understand." I typed, deleted, retyped. In the end, I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't eat me alive. A coworker later told me, in the sideways way people share gossip they know will hurt, that Miles had been let go from his firm. Not because of the affair, the whisper went, but because he had misrepresented a client's expenses. Dishonesty has a way of showing up in more than one corner. Clara didn't text me at all. I heard, again through other people, that she was staying at her parents' house. I imagined Vivian pacing their marble foyer like a general after a lost battle, charting which invitations would be rescinded, which favors called in, which bridges burned. I surprised myself by feeling nothing. Or maybe what I felt was relief that any bridge I had to that world was already a pile of ash. A week later, I met my parents for dinner at a small diner on Maple Avenue, across from the park where my dad used to time my laps when I was a kid. My mother reached for my hand the second I sat down. "You don't have to pay us back," she said before I could even open the menu. "I will," I told her. "I need to. For me." My father sipped his coffee and nodded. "Then we'll let you." He had always understood the language of dignity. We talked about everything but the wedding, a neighbor's new dog, the school where my mother sometimes substituted, the leaky faucet in their kitchen. When the check came, I took it. My mom pretended to protest, but the relief in her eyes told the truth. On the sidewalk afterward, the autumn air smelled like cut grass and rain. I hugged them both and promised to call tomorrow. I moved out 2 weeks later, trading the apartment I'd shared with Clara for a smaller place on the east side, above a bookstore that smelled like dust and pine cleaner. The floors creaked. The heat hissed in the radiators. It felt honest. I bought a thrifted table, 2 chairs, and a second-hand couch. The landlord helped me carry boxes up the narrow stairs, and when we were done, he said, "You look like you need a win, kid." He knocked on the wall between apartments. "You just got one. That wall's solid brick. You won't hear a thing from next door." The first night there, I ate takeout noodles from the carton and listened to the rain plink against the window. I set my phone, with its trove of messages and missed calls, face down on the table. On impulse, I opened my laptop and moved the video file, the hotel footage, to an encrypted folder with a new name that meant nothing to anyone but me. I didn't watch it. I just needed to know it was there. A lightning rod that grounded my version of reality whenever doubt tried to rewrite the past. The doubt did try sometimes. In the quiet moments, my brain whispered alternate scenes. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe the public reveal had been cruel. Then memory would click back into place. We'll never get caught. The timestamp. The way Miles's hand moved like he already knew her body. There are facts so solid they become the floor you stand on. People kept asking if I was okay. I didn't have a neat answer. Okay isn't something you arrive at like a destination and set your bags down. It's more like a series of small choices. Take a walk, drink water, call your sister, write the email you've been avoiding, open the blinds. I found myself making those choices more often than not. On good days, work clicked and I came home with enough energy to cook. On bad days, I ate cereal for dinner and watched reruns until the credits blurred. One Saturday, I ran into Tony, the AV tech from Silverwood Estate, at a hardware store. For a split second, I braced for accusation. Instead, he lifted his hands, palms out. "Man," he said, eyes tired but kind. "I just want to say, that took guts. I'm sorry you had to do it." I exhaled. "I'm sorry you got dragged into it." He shook his head. "I've seen a lot of weddings. Half of them are theater anyway. Most people act like they're telling the truth because they're on a stage. At least you actually told it." He clapped my shoulder and moved on. It was nothing and everything. The Harringtons kept trying their public spin, but it worked about as well as you'd expect in a town where half the guests had seen the projector with their own eyes. Some of their prominent friends fell in line. The rest retreated, the way people do when money and embarrassment collide. My name came up less and less in the retellings. Eventually, it stopped coming up at all. A scandal burns hot and then becomes another piece of local lore. Remember that wedding where? Oh yeah, wild. As for Miles and Clara, I didn't investigate. Maybe they tried to make a go of it. Maybe they imploded immediately. A friend told me they were spotted together at a bar a month later, trying to keep their heads down. I shrugged and changed the subject. They were not my problem anymore. They were two people who had made a choice, and I had made mine. In December, I took on a brutal but rewarding project at work, rewriting a legacy integration that had become a Jenga tower of brittle fixes. I loved it. The code was unforgiving, but if I did the work right, things held. If I cut corners, they broke. Software has a way of teaching you about integrity that translates cleanly to the rest of your life. By January, I'd set up a payment plan with my parents and transferred the first chunk. My mother cried again, good tears this time. My dad sent a text with a single thumbs up, which in his lexicon was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I started running after work, tracing loops around Ridgewood Park until the cold air burned clean through my lungs. On my runs, I drafted future plans. Maybe a certification. Maybe a leap into product architecture. Maybe a sabbatical one day in a cabin with terrible Wi-Fi. Plans are a way of telling yourself time still unspools ahead. Spring arrived shyly, and then, all at once. The bookstore downstairs propped its door open, and the smell of paper drifted up the stairwell. I bought a houseplant and kept it alive. I learned the owner's dog's name. I laughed more easily. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but it softened from a stab to a memory. Every now and then, someone new would hear about the wedding and ask if it was true. The answer didn't change. Sometimes they'd say it was epic. Other times they'd say it was savage. I didn't argue either label. You do what you can live with. That day, in that hall, with that evidence in my pocket and the clock ticking down to vows that would have been a lie, I did the thing I could live with. The rest is commentary. I kept the clip. I don't watch it. It sits in the encrypted folder like a sealed envelope in a drawer, a note to my future self that says, "You didn't imagine it. You trusted your instincts. You told the truth, even when your voice shook." If anyone ever tries to revise the story, I have the unflinching version. Maybe I'll never need it. That would be best. On an ordinary Tuesday, months later, I passed Silverwood Estate on my way to a client lunch. The gates stood open, the gravel rake smooth, a florist unloading buckets of peonies by the door. Another couple would be married that afternoon. I wished them peace. Not perfection, just honesty. I drove on. That night, as the sun slid down behind the bookstore awning and the apartment filled with a mellow gold, I made dinner and ate by the window. The plant leaned towards the light, unfurling a new leaf with slow, stubborn certainty. I thought of the younger version of me, who walked down a hotel corridor with a keycard in his hand, and I wanted to tell him that what comes after isn't blaze and thunder. It's quiet mornings and steady work, the body remembering how to breathe without bracing for impact, the mind relearning the shape of trust. You keep going. You build again. You choose in 100 small ways to be okay. I washed the dishes. I texted my parents a photo of the plant because my mother had been invested in its survival. I set my phone, screen down, on the table, and for once I didn't dread the buzz of a notification. The apartment was warm, the radiator ticking like a contented metronome. Outside, Ridgewood hummed with the soft noises of a city winding itself toward sleep. There was no wedding. There was no fiancé. There was no best friend. But there was a life, and it was mine again.